Okay, folks, I think we're ready to start. So, good evening and welcome. My name is Mary Erlander, and I am the director of the Arctic and Northern Studies program, which I'm happy to announce because our name has just recently changed from the Northern Studies program to the Arctic and Northern Studies program, which we've done in order to reflect our greater emphasis on the Arctic now, and in fact we've just launched a new MA concentration in Arctic policy. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about Dr. Sergunin, and then I'd like to share with you the reason why we've brought him and his two students, whom I'll introduce, here for this series of lectures. I'll try not to take too long because I know you really came to hear him. But so Dr. Sergunin is Professor of International Relations Theory and History at St. Petersburg State University in Russia. He's also Professor of Political Science at the St. Petersburg branch of the Higher School of Economics. His specialties include EU-Russia relations, Russian foreign policy making, and Russian Arctic policy. He teaches in the fields of security studies, arms control and disarmament, conflict resolution, peace studies, and international relations history and theory. Dr. Sergunin earned an MA in history from Nizhny Novgorod State University and a PhD in history from Moscow State University, and then he wrote a second dissertation in political science at St. Petersburg University. He has won numerous fellowships and awards that have allowed him to travel and lecture and research in several other countries, quite a few other countries, including the United States. And he collaborates extensively with other researchers and academics who focus on the Arctic. He has published extensively in books, monographs, textbooks, and peer-reviewed journal articles on Russian foreign policy, EU-Russian relations, climate change, Russian-U.S. relations, Russian Arctic policy, and international relations in the Arctic. So, our impetus for bringing him here to UAF was that in February of 2014, 3 of our Northern Studies MA students, Vanessa Raymond and Evgenia Sidorova and Troy Buffard, all, along with another UAF student, Tracy Rogers, went to Archangel to participate in a pilot Model Arctic Council program. And they came back just raving about the experience, raving about the richness of the learning experience, and in particular the expertise of the lecturers they had the privilege of hearing while they were there. And in particular, they praised Dr. Alexander Sergunin for his expertise in Arctic politics and governance. So I was determined that this extraordinary experience that they had wouldn't be just an isolated great event in their lives with no further implications for them or for our students, our other students. And I wanted these encounters and collaboration to continue. So I applied for the Scheibel Memorial Cultural Enrichment Fund grant, and I won it. And so I wrote to Dr. Sergunin, who didn't know me at all, and asked him if he would come over here. Of course, we would pay his way. And he very graciously and quickly agreed. And then Dr. John Eichelberger, who's the dean of our graduate school, really wanted to take it a step further and have a graduate student exchange be a part of this. So through his role in the University of the Arctic, he funded the travel of 2 of Dr. Sergunin's graduate students, whom he chose for this experience. And so they are with us this evening, too, and I'd like to introduce them. And would you please stand up? There's Mikhail Strokin and Maria Kotseva. So, and it's been so exciting because almost from the moment they got here and started interacting with graduate students here, the students started recognizing their similar research interests, and so there's been a lot of buzz and a lot of excitement. And in fact, Mikhail, I understand, has already proposed that he will establish a graduate student network for students throughout the circumpolar north so they can interact with each other and collaborate on their research and so on. So we're just delighted with how the week has been going. So, and finally, Dr. Sergunin and his students are here tonight in the spirit of collaboration in researching and learning about the Arctic, given the common challenges that we face and the necessity for both interdisciplinarity and international collaboration in preparing for the future in this region that we share. So with that, I'd like to introduce Dr. Alexander Sergunin. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mary. My special thanks because of invitation of my students. I think it's maybe even more important thing than my visit here, because they are our future and our investment in the future. This is my first stay in Alaska, and I'm very impressed by Alaskan nature, by Alaskan hospitality, by University of Alaska, and I hope that we will have a long-term, sustainable, and fruitful cooperation in the future. Thank you very much once again. Well, let me move to my presentation. In my presentation, I'd like to outline the major components of Russia's Arctic strategies, both its soft and hard security dimensions. And let me start from a description of some widespread stereotypes in foreign countries, not only in the Western countries, not only in the US, but also we can find that kind of stereotypes among our partner countries in East Asia, in South Asia, and other interested countries. The first stereotype is that Russia is an expansionist, revisionist country that aims at establishing its control over the Arctic natural resources. For example, people, they point to the fact that the Russian famous geographer and traveler Artur Chilingarov put a Titanic flag on the bottom of the Arctic Ocean, exactly in the Northern Pole in August 2007. Then also to the fact that Russia claims the Lomonosov and Mendeleev underwater ridges potentially rich in oil and gas. That kind of facts or evidence is used to prove that Russia has some kind of expansionist aspirations in the region. One more stereotype is that Russia is not only expansionist but also a militarist power, that Russia resumed the air and maritime space patrolling in the Arctic and the North Atlantic since 2007, that Russia modernizes the Northern Fleet, both its conventional and nuclear components. Also, Putin ordered to create a special Arctic task force, and also he launched a border guard build-up in order to control the Arctic Ocean coastline. So that kind of evidence is given to prove that Russia also has some kind of ambitious strategic geopolitical motivation and ready to act in a very aggressive way. On the other hand, some experts they believe that Russia is a sort of an emergent world energy hegemon because of the vast Arctic natural resources, and that Russia will some kind of use that energy weaponry to dictate its will throughout the world. But on the other hand, there is another extreme. Some experts, they believe that Russia is a sort of a colossus with the feet of clay, very weak actually, because the Arctic oil and gas deposits are overestimated. They are not really accessible in the foreseeable future, and the exploitation of these resources is quite expensive. So for that reason, Russia will not get any additional leverages in its energy politics and strategies. Plus, this group of experts mentions that there is a U.S. shale gas revolution that can undermine again Russia's strength in this energy field. Unfortunately, I don't have a time to destroy all these stereotypes, but during the course of my presentation, I try to address some of these theses, some of these concepts which I believe wrong. But also, let me mention that one more stereotypes is that Russia is a monolithic country without any debate, discourse on Arctic strategies, that all the Russian experts and politicians, they are in favor of Putin's regime, and etc. Not at all. I mean, we have quite a diverse intellectual landscape. We have a lot of policy and foreign policy schools, including the Arctic problematique. To cut it short, let me identify two major approaches, theoretical approaches to the Russian Arctic strategies. The first one, I'll call it a value-based approach, which is developed by the neoliberal foreign policy school in Russia. And the neoliberals, they believe that the Arctic is a sort of a common humankind's heritage or asset, that the main priorities for the Arctic cooperation should be environmental protection and the so-called human dimension, meaning, first of all, indigenous people, but also some other people, I mean, those people who are working in the Arctic zone of the Russian Federation, and should get better conditions to continue the living and working in this region. Also, this group of experts believes that regional institutions such as the Arctic Council and the Barents Euro-Arctic Council is and will be a part of the global governance system, subordinated to the more general institutions such as the United Nations, etc. And they believe that we should think of gradual building that kind of global governance system where the Arctic should be one of them, one of the crucial components. On the other hand, we have another extreme which comes from the realist or neo-realist camp, and this approach is called interest-based approach. Quite pragmatic, not to call cynical, maybe sometimes it's cynical one. They believe that each Arctic and non-Arctic country which has any interest in the Arctic region, they aim at protecting its national interests in the region, such as priorities in division of the continental shelf and delimitation of maritime territories, control over the maritime routes and passages, military presence in the region. And also we have a lot of mixed or hybrid versions, and the Russian strategies of 2008 and 2013 are also based on that kind of mixed approaches. And they try, on the one hand, formulate some kind of romantic, idealistic strategic objectives, but on the other hand, quite pragmatic in terms of implementation of the strategies, in terms of formulated Russian strategic interest in the region. To continue, if you just look to the security field, if you try to evaluate the Arctic problems through the prism of security, the concept of security, we can identify also three major approaches. The first one, I would call it a securitized approach. This group of experts and politicians, they believe that each Arctic problem could be seen from the national security point of view, and that kind of problems can range from environmental problems or fisheries, say, to territorial disputes and control over the sea routes. That group of experts tend to perceive everything as a problem, as a security problem, as a security threat, or at least a challenge. On the other hand, we have another opposite group which believe that the so-called de-securitized approach is better, and they try to read or interpret all the Arctic issues in a way as a technocratic or instrumentalist manner. They believe that most of the Arctic problems they can be solved beyond the security context in a sort of regular, normal way, without involving security considerations. And again, the Russian Arctic doctrines of 2008 and 2013, they try to implement both approaches. And on the other hand, you can find in the texts of these documents a lot of instrumentalist, technocratic approaches. But on the other hand, there are sections which are devoted to the Arctic security problems, and then tend to treat them from this securitized approach. And if you look at these documents, try to deconstruct them, you can see that sometimes some pieces, some sections of these doctrines, they contradict each other, they collide with each other. So it's quite a strange impression. Okay, let me briefly outline Russia's national, not mythical, not some kind of prescribed interests, but the real national interests in the Arctic. First of all, of course, it's natural resources, and first of all, mineral resources such as the oil and gas. According to the U.S. Geological Service survey, probably about 25% of hydrocarbon unproven reserves are in Arctic, and the biggest part of these reserves is located in the Russian sector of the Arctic. For example, this region is very important for Russia in terms of producing gas, and the Russian Arctic sector accounts for 90% of Russia's gas production and about 70% of Russia's oil production, and the prospects prognosis even more optimistic. And currently, the Russian geologists, they discovered about 200 oil and gas deposits in the Arctic zone of the Russian Federation. And 22 large deposits are located in the Barents and Kara Seas shelf. And the Russian leadership and the Russian scholars, they believe that development of these deposits quite promising, and they expect to invest a lot of money there. You can see in this slide that the Barents and Kara Seas and the northwestern part of this region, and you can see that this science, especially a lot of that kind of science designating oil and gas fields. Also, the Arctic zone of the Russian Federation is rich in other mineral resources, such as the rare metals, and in this slide you can see the percentage, how many rare metals are extracted in the Arctic zone of the Russian Federation, and metals and gems and other precious raw materials. For example, almost 100% of diamonds, almost 100% of platinum group elements, etc. Not only mineral resources, but also the region is rich in bioresources, a lot of unique species, fish species, animals, and Russia has quite a lot of special programs to protect biodiversity in this area. Although some of them they are in danger, and Russia needs international cooperation to protect them. Also, in terms of industrial base, the Arctic zone of the Russian Federation is very important. It's a paradoxical that the region, which has only 1% of the Russian population, at the same time produces 11% of the Russian GDP and 22% of Russia's export earnings. Maybe this photograph is not the best one in terms of demonstrating the efficiency of Russian industry. On the contrary, it could be illustration for the pollution. It is a photograph nickel combined in the nickel town nearby the Norwegian border, the Murmansk region. But in terms of industrial importance, it's quite crucial for the Russian economy. And also, in contrast with the other Arctic regions in other countries, there's a huge concentration of urban population in this area. Of course, one of the most important Russian national interests and priorities is the development of the Northern Sea Route. And the region is quite a promising transport junction, not only for Russia but also internationally. For example, Northern Sea Route is much shorter than the similar routes through the Suez Channel. In this slide, you can see the figures, some statistics why it's so. And not only this is important for Northern and Western Europe and East Asia, but also this route can be potentially important for communication between Northern Russia and North America. The route is much shorter than via the Panama Channel. Also, there is a number of pilot projects between, for example, Canada and Russia to establish direct sea routes between Canadian and Russian northern ports. Currently, they are looking for investment and for money to make these trips regular. On this slide, you can see that, this slide illustrates that the Northern Sea Route as well as the Northwest Passage, they provide a lot of opportunities to save money, fuel, and time to reach ports. There is an official map of the Northern Sea Route, which starts in the Kara Gates and continues till the Bering Strait. And this is a map of the water area around the Northern Sea Route. This map demonstrates possible alternative routes in the Northern Sea Route area, including the most radical one via the Northern Pole, which was demonstrated by the Chinese icebreaker Snow Dragon last summer. I mean, not this year, but 2013. But also, not only the sea routes, but also there are some prospects for cross-polar air routes, and there are already some kind of flights, circumpolar flights for cargo routes, and this traffic grows much faster than the air traffic in other parts of the world. For example, according to some reports, it's grows faster, 4 times than the world one. Of course, these circumpolar routes are not safe enough for the passenger aircraft because of the lack of telecommunication technologies and navigation stations in the area. But in the future, probably, if the international cooperation succeed, it would be quite a promising market for not only cargo but also for passenger navigation. To continue with the description of Russia's national interests in the Arctic, let me mention also environmental concerns that Moscow has in this region. Most of them, they are stemming from the Soviet past, because this area was heavily industrialized and militarized, and there is a lot of waste and polluted areas in this region. For example, the Russian scientists, they identify 27 so-called impact zones that were polluted or contaminated to the extent that this led to environmental degradation and increased morbidity among the local population. Here I list the most polluted areas among them the Murmansk region, Norilsk urban agglomeration, as well as West Siberian oil and gas fields and Arkhangelsk region. On and all, about 15% of the Russian Arctic sector is polluted or contaminated. This is a map of most polluted Russian areas in the north, in the high north. Sorry, it's in Russian. I was unable to find that kind of map in English. Of course, among the environmental concerns, nuclear safety has one of the most important priorities. Also, it relates somehow to the Soviet past because both in the Soviet time and in the Russian period, we had more than 80 nuclear submarines in this region. Let me remind you that the Kola Peninsula is the home for the Russian strategic fleet. 2/3 of Russian strategic fleet is they reside there, and also over 200 nuclear reactors were stored in this region. The most sad story is that from early 60s to early 90s, the Soviet Union dumped nuclear waste in the Barents and Kara Seas, and we have a lot of problems with radioactivity over there. And some reactors which were dumped in the seas, they are in a bad condition, and some specialists they predict that they could create a lot of problems for fisheries and for the environment in general in the foreseeable future. And they ask for for some urgent actions to cope with this problem. Moving further, it's also the problem with indigenous peoples. We have approximately 27 indigenous ethnic groups, with a total number ranging from 200,000 people to 265 indigenous people. Statistics varies, and I was unable to get exact figures in this regard. Also, we have the following problems with indigenous people, such as, for example, the challenges and threats to the traditional way of life under the current harsh economic conditions, lower level of competitive abilities among the indigenous people, especially under the condition of the market economy, which is in place now in Russia in general. Growth of diseases and pathologies, most of them are brought by the people who just inflow to the region. Also high infant mortality rate, alcoholism, etc. Unemployment is very really high in the region among indigenous people, amounts to some 30-60%, which is 3-4 times higher than among the other inhabitants of the Arctic zone of the Russian Federation. And the life expectancy is also very low among the indigenous people. Well, the Russian government undertakes some measures to improve the situation. In 2009, a special strategy was approved by the Russian government with regard to the indigenous people, and a number of concrete specific measures have been planned. Some of them they were already implemented, but some not, and we have some difficulties, most of the financial nature, and given the ambitious projects such as the Sochi Olympic Winter Games, such as the absorption of Crimea, and also dealing with the Ukrainian refugees on the Russian territory. We had almost 1 million Ukrainian refugees quite recently. Some of them they already came back, but about 500,000 still still there, and the Russian authorities, both local and federal, have to deal with that problem. So a number of projects in the Arctic region, including the programs to assist indigenous people, they were suspended or frozen because of that. Also we had a number of conflicts with the indigenous peoples organizations, especially with the main one, with the so-called RIPON, and the peak of this conflict was in 2012. This organization was dissatisfied with the way how the Russian government implemented this 2009 strategy, but this conflict somehow was overcome. I mean, this is not that acute form, but we still have some problems in dialogue with the indigenous peoples. Then also we have a number of strategic military challenges in the High North. Most of them maybe are perceptional, but still the Russian military elites and political elites, they believe that kind of hard security challenges, they still exist in the region. For example, the military, they still believe that the Russian High North is important in terms of getting access to the Arctic Ocean and Atlantic Ocean, Northern Atlantic. Also, this region, as I mentioned already, is important in terms that it hosts two-thirds of Russian strategic nuclear submarine fleet. Also, the Arkhangelsk air defense sector is important in terms of strategic defense, and as the Russian military believe that it's helpful in protecting Russia's security against the potential U.S. surprise attack over the northern pole. Again, Russian military discontent with the military exercises run by U.S. and NATO, especially cold response exercises, which were run since 2006. And especially Russia is anxious about the future plans delivered by both the United States and other NATO Arctic countries, especially by the U.S. Defense Department Arctic strategy and the Navy roadmap, which foresees some kind of military modernization, and Russia is preparing some countermeasures in this regard. These are rather popular slides, photographs of Russian strategic submarines, Russian flagship cruiser Peter the Great, military exercises around the New Siberian Islands last year. But let me underline that, of course, there is a lot of myths surrounding the modernization programs around the Arctic Ocean rim space. I believe that there is no military build-up in the Arctic, not only in the Russian part of it, but also in general. There are some modernization programs and efforts to increase the coastal states' control over the vast northern territories to prevent non-traditional security challenges. For example, for Russia and for Canada, for example, threats such as poaching, smuggling are looming ahead, and probably illegal immigration, probably even piracy can emerge if we will see the ice-free Arctic in the future. Also, it is important to note that the military force has changed its meaning in the Arctic context. Now it does not serve the global East-West confrontation, rather it aims at protection of the economic interests of the regional players. If you look at the modernization programs, most of them, they aim at developing the coast guards rather than offensive capabilities. Also, the key international actors in the Arctic region, they believe that it's much easier to solve the existing problems through negotiations than by means of war. And everyone understands that war in the Arctic is quite dangerous for all sides, because the Arctic nature, the Arctic environment is quite fragile, and implications can be unpredictable. Talking about the Russian doctrinal conceptual basis, let me recall the two key strategic documents. One was adopted in 2008. It's called The Foundations of the State Policy of the Russian Federation in the Arctic up to 2020 and beyond. That was the first strategic document where Russia formulated its strategic interests, where it's formulated its long-term strategy for the region. And this strategy has been specified, has been developed by the next document, which has been adopted in February 2013, and called Strategy for the Development of the Arctic Zone of the Russian Federation. Unfortunately, all these international crises, they interrupted further development of Russian conceptual basis, because this strategy envisaged the need to make a specific sub-strategies in each sector, in each field. For example, sustainable socio-economic development of the Arctic zone of the Russian Federation, environmental strategies, renewed, redefined strategy for indigenous peoples, that kind of things. But all this work has been stopped or suspended for uncertain future because of the Ukrainian crisis, first of all. Let me describe the Russian future Arctic strategy in terms of the so-called SWOT analysis. This method is favored for the economic sciences and for social sciences as well in general. First of all, I'd like to identify four drivers of Russia's future strategy. The first one is climate change mitigation. Secondly, it's making the Arctic Russia's strategic resource basis. This aim was first proclaimed in the strategy 2008. Thirdly, the need for sustainable development of the Arctic zone of the Russian Federation. And finally, making the Arctic a region of peace and international cooperation. That's four priorities for the future Russian strategies, so long-term priorities. Let me start from the first priority, climate change mitigation. On the one hand, we have opportunities in this field because climate change, warming, ice melt, provides the countries of the region, including Russia, with increased accessibility to the Arctic natural resources and sea routes. Maybe 20 years ago, it was impossible to construct oil rigs in the offshore, in the Pechora and Kara seas, where we have now, in Pechora Sea, we have an oil rig which already produces oil, and in the Kara Sea, we have an experimental platform, experimental rig. But on the other hand, we have challenges in this area because there is a lot of unpredictable environmental implications, such as unpredictable changes in the flora and fauna, threats to traditional economies of indigenous people, potential increase in international competition over the Arctic natural resources and sea routes because of the same reason, the increased accessibility. As far as the second priority is concerned, making the Arctic countries strategic resource base, there also we can identify a number of opportunities, such as the quite good prospects for the development of the Russian oil and gas industries and mining. Secondly, the Northern Sea Route development as both domestic and international trade routes. Thirdly, development of circumpolar air traffic, which already has been mentioned. And fourth, development of Arctic tourism, which is an embryo among the Arctic countries, including Russia, but has quite promising perspectives. But on the other hand, we have a lot of challenges in this area. First of all, it's an unclear perspective for the offshore oil and gas industries because of the lack of safe and green technologies, high costs, especially given the current decrease in oil prices. And according to American and Russian experts, extraction of oil, the price less than $90 a barrel, it would be not profitable. So, I mean, from that perspective, the future of Arctic oil is quite gloomy, but it is the foreseeable future. Also, the shale revolution undermined the prospects, the rosy prospects for the gas production in the Arctic region. Also, some potential dangerous environmental consequences: oil spills, air, water, and terrestrial pollution as a result of increased economic activities. Also, there could be some problematic implications for the traditional economies developed by indigenous peoples. And finally, there is a lot of legal, political, technical, and financial problems within Northern Sea route exploitation. I don't have time to come into details. Those of you who are interested in that, I can discuss it in detail privately or during the Q&A session. Let me move to another priority, which is sustainable development of the Arctic zone of the Russian Federation. Among the priorities, opportunities, the growth of Russian domestic and foreign investment to the regional economy, federal programs to support traditional economies and indigenous peoples, environmental programs such as Clean the Arctic should be mentioned. But on the other hand, among the challenges, we can identify things like that the volume of investment and the scope of federal socio-economic and environmental programs are lagging behind the real needs of the Russian zone of the Arctic zone of the Russian Federation. And also Moscow is still unable to develop a proper public-private cooperation in the Arctic zone of the Russian Federation. This is quite a problem for Russia because quite often the big businesses they don't cooperate with the local societies, with regional local authorities, as well as with the federal authorities. Finally, making the Arctic a region of peace and international cooperation. Among the opportunities, I would identify things like international partners' interest in exploiting the Arctic natural resources, sea routes, and making Arctic research, because we share in common a lot of things, especially in the field of Arctic research and application of climate change, environmental problems, etc. Secondly, it's a decreasing role of military strategic factors. Contrary to the alarmist predictions, the military presence in terms of numbers is decreasing in the Arctic, not increasing. Thirdly, the progress in the institutional settings. For example, we have such forum like Arctic Council, Barents Euro-Arctic Council, Nordic and UN institutions and regimes, and they are booming. For example, say 15, 20 years ago, 20 years ago, the Arctic Council didn't exist at all. But over the last 15 years, the Arctic Council became quite authoritative intergovernmental forum, still not organization, full-fledged organization, still a forum, but already it has a permanent secretariat, which is located in Tromsø, Norway, and it has a lot of working groups which are quite helpful in addressing specific Arctic problems. And the Arctic Council is growing. Also, the Barents Euro-Arctic Council, he just gave the second birth in 2013 when the second summit was held and the second charter was approved by the heads of the governments and the states in a special meeting. Also, Nordic institutions are mushrooming, and the regimes are mushrooming in the region and quite helpful in funding all these initiatives and projects in the region. On the other hand, we have challenges. For example, there is still a lack of funds for large-scale projects, such as, for example, the Stockman gas field. The Stockman gas field was discovered by the Soviet Union in late 80s. In early 2000s, a special consortium was formed from Gazprom, the Russian gas monopoly, also Norwegian firm Hydro-Statoil and French Total. But a couple of years ago, Hydro-Statoil withdrew from the consortium due to different financial and technical reasons, and maybe political as well, but still not clear. And the Russian Gazprom was unable to find any new partner, and it's a pity because Russia is quite weak in terms of offshore drilling technologies. I mean, when the depth is quite significant, we don't have that kind of technologies. That's why we invited Hydro-Statoil, which has that kind of technologies. The same reason was for inviting ExxonMobil to drill oil wells. Then also territorial disputes which still exist between the Arctic 5, Arctic coastal states, including the US-Russian relations, for example. The Russian Federation still didn't ratify the US-Soviet agreement on delimitation of the Bering Sea, which was concluded in 1990. And although, in fact, both sides, they observed this treaty, but still, I mean, some kind of tension, some kind of mistrust still there. And the lack of ratification impedes the further delimitation of Russian and US exclusive economic zones, especially in the Chukchi area, the Chukchi Sea. As I mentioned, the lack of trust, and unfortunately, most recent international crisis, such as the Ukrainian crisis, before the Georgian crisis, now it's Islamic State, Ebola, for various reasons they prevent from us from further cooperation. Crisis such as Ukrainian one is simply undermines trust, while Islamic State, Ebola, they divert attention from the Arctic problems to some other, maybe some of them not really, not real, but still they're quite high on the agenda. Let me conclude by outlining the areas for the potential US-Russian cooperation. If you look at the security policies, I believe that we can contribute to or ameliorate the security environment in the region by decreasing military presence and activities in the Arctic, especially in the Barents Sea, where still we have quite a confrontation between US and Russia, between Russia and other NATO forces, naval forces, Norwegian, British, and so on. Also, I think this could be quite important prior to the development of confidence and security building measures in the Arctic. Currently, there is no that kind of measures at all. Also, spreading the arms control regime into the Arctic, which again currently does not exist. Also, some experts they suggest to extend the Conventional Forces Europe Treaty to the Arctic region, and probably it's a good idea to make a specific regime for the Arctic region as well. Currently, the naval armaments in the region are not under any control. There is no regime to control the naval armaments, and especially the NATO countries, they oppose that kind of agreements. Russia, for example, several times suggested to conclude that kind of arms control agreement, but for some reasons NATO declined these proposals. Also, intelligence information sharing, for example, on dangerous activities in the region could be helpful. And before the Ukraine crisis, there were some trends, some developments in that direction, but not now. Economy and trade, also quite important area, and we have a lot of potential for cooperation in the energy sector, and there were some plans, for example, to produce liquid natural gas in the Russian Arctic sector and export to Canada and to the United States. But again, because of the shale revolution, that kind of plans they were destroyed or suspended. Also mining, for example, Canada is ahead of the United States. In that regard, the Canadian firms, companies, they already there, and they help the Russian mining companies to extract gold, silver, copper, other rare metals. Telecommunications, they use very strong in this field, and while Russia lagging behind in this technological sphere, so why not to make that kind of cooperation stronger, especially in navigation systems, especially to monitor the maritime and airspace in the Arctic. And development of infrastructures for the Northern Sea Route and the circumpolar air routes also could be an important priority for our bilateral cooperation. Legal issues. As I mentioned, Russia has not ratified the US-Soviet Treaty on the delimitation of the Bering Sea. I think this homework should be done. This could be seriously improve the whole environment in our bilateral relations. And actually, the number of legislators in State Duma and the Council of the Federation now is pretty small. But the anti-American sentiments, they became stronger after the Ukrainian crisis. But I believe that with time, when the Ukrainian crisis will be solved, it would be a good time to come back to this point and solve the problem. Also, the fact that the United States didn't ratify United Nations Convention on the Law of the Seas also is a sort of a technical barrier for development of cooperation between our countries. In this case, the US should make homework and ratify this convention. Also, one of the priorities is the delimitation of the maritime space in the Chukchi Sea, which is beyond the 200-mile exclusive economic zone. This is a question open to discussion for the time being. Also, environmental protection and monitoring, large-scale studies of the Arctic climate change, the status of Arctic wild animals and plants, social, economic, and demographic trends in the far north could be priority. Preservation of the unique way of life and culture of the people of the north, search and rescue operations, combating oil spills and other man-made disasters, also quite a promising points on our bilateral agenda. Let me close by saying that in the foreseeable future, the Kremlin's strategy in the Arctic will be quite predictable and pragmatic rather than revisionist and spontaneous. I strongly believe that. On the other hand, such a strategy aims at defending Russia's legitimate economic interests in the region. On the other hand, Moscow is open to cooperation with foreign partners that are willing to partake in exploiting the Arctic natural resources and sea routes. And I should underline that it's important to provide Russia with a friendly and favorable international environment. It should be both ways. It should be the highway with the two ways movement. Thank you.
So, please, question.
Yes.
I heard in 2 months back, early in the year, that haven't seen it, certainly not seen it in English, but the 2014 strategy. Is it something smaller, or is there have they put out a newer strategy, or is it just a modification?
You mean the Russian one?
The Russian Arctic strategy.
No, it was not a strategy. Just that there was a Security Council meeting in April 2014, which produced some kind of a concept for the sustainable socio-economic and environmental development of the Arctic zone of the Russian Federation. It's not full-fledged strategy. It's just a follow-up to the strategy of 2000.
It wasn't signed put out by Putin, or it was below that.
I mean, that kind of documents is normally signed by Putin because he's a chairman of the Security Council.
What you outlined is not too different from an official strategy of the United States with regard to the Arctic. Hardly accepted in Washington, the strategy is that the Arctic is so far away from Washington. Whereas Russia is, the Arctic is, northern Russia is the Arctic. But the emphasis in both cases is on strategy for military security, etc., and exploitation, economic exploitation of non-renewable resources. So there's not much there about managing the renewable resources of the Arctic of Russia, and for Alaska, that's all important. And the Arctic, of course, by the Arctic Council, includes the Bering Sea, which we share, especially the Pacific salmon, but the fisheries is so rich, and we're so fortunately endowed with these resources, but we don't, seems like the Russian Far East doesn't have the freedom to operate in their interests as much as we have in Alaska within the United States government. And that's a real handicap. It makes it very difficult for Alaska to collaborate with Kamchatka and the Russian Far East, both in economic development related to use of renewable resources, but also in their conservation and wise management. And then this is going to increase in the Chukchi Sea as the sea ice declines. We don't know it, but as far as I know, there's little research by Russia in the Chukchi Sea that focuses on potential fisheries and how things are changing with regard to climate warming and warming of the seas. So, is there no interest in European, Russia, and Putin's government on these renewable resources and their proper management? And of course, it relates very much to the residents of the Arctic, the indigenous peoples.
Well, yes and no. I mean, theoretically, of course, there's a lot of talk about the renewable resources in Russia. They started under the Medvedev presidency. President Medvedev is a different generation, not like Putin. He's much younger even than me, and he's just obsessed about technology, innovations. He just launched the Russian innovation strategy when he was a president. And one of the sections of this strategy was about renewable resources. But he and his team didn't specify the Arctic region as the potential possible priority. And they probably made an emphasis only on one alternative source of energy, it's atomic nuclear energy, but nothing about windmills, tide energy, that kind of stuff. There's also some projects within the so-called Northern Dimension Environmental Program Partnership, which is between the European Union and Russia, northwestern Russia. But it's a quite small one. The European Union established several centers in the Russian northwest, in Kaliningrad, in Petrozavodsk, in St. Petersburg, in Pskov, in Novgorod the Great, some small centers that train and retrain the local people in renewable energies. But to my understanding, it's a bit formalistic and small-scale programs. As far as your question about the powers, the competences, the prerogatives which the Russian Far Eastern and Arctic regions they have, that's a problem. I mean, it's a part of the it's part of the larger problem. I mean, it's the problem about Russian federalist model. I mean, it's I believe that's a sort of pendulum oscillation in the relationship between the center and periphery in my country. In the 90s, when Yeltsin was the president, there was some kind of freedom for the Russian regions, for the Russian members of the federation, maybe too much freedom. And sometimes it looked like anarchy, or the lack of attention from Moscow to the especially remote border regions like Far Eastern regions and the Arctic regions. At that time, these regions were completely abandoned, forgotten. But when Putin came into power, the pendulum swung in the opposite direction, and the re-centralization took place. Now, I guess it's again slowly, gradually, is going in the opposite direction, and to provide the regions, the members of the federation, with more powers. For example, last year, a special ministry for the development of the Far Eastern regions has been established with the aim to provide regions with more powers, more autonomy, more freedom. Just we'll see what will happen in this regard. So there is a special ministry which should channel money, funds, investment, social capital to that end. Let's see what will happen. I mean, normally, the socio-economic effect is seen in 5-7 years in a mid-term perspective.
You sort of characterize Russia's Arctic policy as being very pragmatic and proceeding by sort of rational policy considerations. But to what degree is there a disconnect, or is there a disconnect between sort of the pragmatic policy decisions and playing to a domestic audience politically? Is there any sort of element of political theater involved in Russia's either their actual policies on the Arctic or the views on the Arctic that are articulated to the public?
Well, as I mentioned, the Russian political landscape is quite diverse. We also have some kind of nationalists. We have liberals who believe that the Arctic should be a common treasury for the whole humankind, and that none of the coastal states should exploit the natural resources on the individual basis. That other countries should be admitted to exploitation of these resources. So sometimes, when especially we have election campaigns, or when for some reasons the government needs social support, they can exercise that kind of nationalistic discourse on the Arctic. And a special kind of people, they came before and they became publicized. They can some strong statements that Arctic is ours, maybe no concessions on the Arctic. I mean, it's pretty the same way like Steve Harper behaves in Canada when the next election campaign is forthcoming. So, I mean, that kind of stuff is quite common in many countries. Russia is not an exception.
You know that in the future, the Arctic oil and gas resources are going to be explored by two largest oil and gas companies, Rosneft and Gazprom. And like the majority of their stocks are owned by the government. So do you think it's good or bad for the future oil and gas exploration? I mean, advantages and or disadvantages?
Not quite sure that I understand your question. You mean whether it's good that the state is owner?
Yeah. So how it can make an impact on the future oil and gas exploration? It's
Well, according to the Constitution, the earth and the ground and what is inside this earth is the property of the people. I mean, by the Constitution, the state ownership is proclaimed, is declared. So, what the companies they can do? They can get licenses, they can get permissions to exploit these resources by the contract with the government. And then actually, all these corporations like Gazprom, Rosneft, they are state-owned, but they operate on the commercial basis. I mean, it's some kind of state capitalism. So they have some kind of dual nature, or dualistic nature. On the one hand, it's state companies, but on the other hand, they operate like commercial companies. I'm not sure that we can describe them as purely government-owned companies. They have also their own interest in that. But not only Gazprom and Rosneft, they will have a say in the gas and oil business in Russia. We also have some private companies. If you look at, for example, what Lukoil is doing, I mean, it's quite a big private oil company. Also, Novatek, they develop the LNG, liquid natural gas plant in Sabeta, which is a brand new facility in the high north. They constructed this LNG plant. They are constructing a seaport. They're constructing an airfield. So the whole infrastructure, it's a private company. They have their own icebreakers, diesel ones, not nuclear powered. So I think that to some extent there is private business in oil and gas industries, much less influential. So, but I'm not sure if, for example, we privatize oil and gas business in Russia, it would be better for the indigenous peoples. At least the government has some kind of strategy. You can criticize it, but still there's some kind of care of indigenous peoples. If it's just only in hands of private business, I'm not sure about the outcome of this. At least these private companies, they're not eager to cooperate with the local communities and spend money for their purposes. Yes?
My understanding is that in the Soviet period, there was a sense that the Soviet Union needed to populate the vast expanse of Siberian territory and built sizable cities of 1 million people or so in sort of very cold, isolated places. And since the fall of the Soviet Union, population has generally moved towards the western part of Russia and urban centers. I was wondering if you think there's a role for sort of repopulating the far north of Russia or increasing population in those remote areas in order to build the sustainable infrastructure.
Well, of course, we didn't have and we don't have urban agglomerations with that kind of population, 1 million people. The largest cities like Murmansk, Norilsk, Arkhangelsk, they have some like 300, 400 at least, at most. We have 5 cities with a population more than 100 people in this area. But you're right, in the 90s, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, there was depopulation. People, they moved, especially the retired persons, they moved from the area because they simply couldn't survive at the time in these cities and towns. Some of these towns, for example, like Dixie, Garka, which is ports on the Arctic Ocean coastline, their population was twice or triple less than in the Soviet times. But now they are repopulated because of the demand. Because of the revival of the Northern Sea Route, because of the reopening all the Soviet military bases, but with the different purposes. Now all these old new naval and air bases, they have a dual use purposes, and most of them they are also used not only in military purposes but also for search and rescue operations. And the Russian Federation has a quite ambitious plan to establish 10 rescue centers along the northern sea route. 3 of them already are in place, they operate already on full scale, and 7 others should be ready by 2016. So most of them they are located in these cities which were constructed, built in the Soviet times. And now they are repopulating, there's an influx of people there. Not terribly big one, but the whole trend is quite positive. Yes, Lars?
Russia has recently did a very big deal with China, selling oil to China. But that means that the prices of gasoline in Russia will go up because the supply will go down. Or how much is gasoline in Russia for automobiles in dollars? I'm curious.
Well, natural gas is not a very popular fuel for Russian cars, trucks. I mean, mostly we have gasoline as the most popular fuel. But as far as the Sino-Russian deal on gas is, it's a long-term perspective. I mean, this contract is a huge one, and first we should build a pipeline for that. It's this pipeline will be operational maybe in the first one will be in 5-7 years, the second one in 10-15 years. Nobody knows exactly. And for the time being, in the near future, there's no prospects for big shipments of gas to China, bigger than now. We simply don't have an infrastructure to do that. So, according to some Russian experts, the prospects for the Russian gas industry is quite problematic, because on one hand we are losing European partners because they want to diversify the sources of gas or build pipelines bypassing Russia. And on the other hand, the pipelines for China are not ready yet. So that's a problem. So I don't see any possibility of any kind of ups in the gas prices inside Russia. I mean, it's just a normal process, and it relates to the inflation in my country.
My question is related to Lars's. I wanted to know if you could describe Russian feelings or Moscow's feelings about Chinese interest in the Arctic.
Yes, it's quite a difficult question, because there's a sort of ambivalence in Moscow about China's and other East Asian countries' role in the Arctic. On the one hand, Moscow understands that China, Japan, South Korea, they have a lot of money to be invested into the Russian Arctic zone of the Russian Federation, especially to the mining industries, extraction of oil, gas, and revival of the infrastructure along the northern sea route. And that was the reason why Moscow actually voted in favor of providing these countries with the permanent observer status in the Arctic Council. For example, Putin changed his mind and decided to vote in favor of this decision after the Chinese president visit in spring 2013, just 1 month before the Arctic Council ministerial meeting in Kiruna in mid-May 2013. And Chinese president promised Putin quite significant Chinese investment to the Arctic zone of the Russian Federation. And that was a final agreement why Putin decided to do so. But some skeptics, they say that, but where is money? I mean, China promised it more than 1 year ago, but no money at all. And even there's no negotiations about that. I mean, this gas contract is a bit different because this contract relates only to the gas fields which we have in Urals and Western and Eastern Siberia, which is not part of the Arctic zone. I mean, it comes from different regions. But maybe in the future there would be branches, pipelines connecting the future Arctic gas and oil to the East Asian countries, but not for the foreseeable future. So the critics of Kremlin's decision to provide China with that kind of status, they say that actually neither China nor other East Asian countries, they didn't they didn't meet criteria which have been established for the permanent observers. First, the permanent observers should contribute significant money into the Arctic research, which is not done by all these countries. These countries should contribute and should financially support indigenous peoples in the region. That wasn't done at all. Then also these countries should care of the Arctic environment. Given the Chinese environmental situation, it's hardly to believe that they can be a model for the countries which cares of environment. Doesn't matter where, in Arctic and elsewhere. And also these countries should acknowledge the primacy of the 5 Arctic coastal states, their legitimate rights, sovereign rights in the Arctic, especially in the fields of exclusive economic zones and seabed. By words, all these countries, they say, yes, we acknowledge this, we recognize that these 5 coastal states, they have a priority. But on the other hand, not on the formal level, but just at the expert level, or even some military, Chinese militaries, they say it quite openly, that these 5 coastal states, they're too selfish, too egoistic, they are wrong doing that kind of business. So they criticize quite heavily these 5 states, and they believe that the whole paradigm should be changed, and China and other countries, they should be admitted to this club, and they should take part in exploitation of these resources and that kind of thing. So, I mean, all these criteria, they are not met by these countries. So it's quite questionable. Yeah.
You're not worried about at the beginning of the talk, you talked about the different kind of approaches, critical approaches, strategic versus the theoretical. And I understand those are kind of mixed together within the strategies that are laid out. There's a perception, at least outside of Russia, that certain forces, the power ministries, Gazprom, Rosneft, have a fairly significant amount of influence within the higher government circles. And I mean, this is a problem everywhere. In the U.S., you have things like NGOs, in Alaska, the native corporations, which can oppose development or kind of counterbalance and bring in the more kind of neoliberal ideas about preservation and about protecting the environment. Aside from experts, is there a counterbalance like that in Russia that can kind of push those priorities within the strategy when there's pressure from the other side to emphasize development?
As far as the oil and gas lobbies are concerned, yes, they have been and they are quite influential in making the Arctic policies. And of course, these lobbies, they have a direct access to the Prime Minister and the President and the presidential apparatus. But they cannot define everything. I mean, because the politics in this field is strongly dependent on the international processes and international developments. Gazprom or Rosneft, they cannot dictate oil prices or gas prices on the international markets. They cannot control the shale revolution in the United States. So I mean, they cannot regulate the demand on oil and gas on the international markets. So they can only, they have some kind of limits for that kind of influence. As far as the military-industrial complex, is concerned, until recently, they had no any say in Arctic politics because the Russian military were quite weak. The Russian defense complex, defense industrial complex was quite weak, and only in 2010, when President Medvedev was when Medvedev was a president, the Kremlin decided to revive the Russian defense industries, revive the Russian military. They ordered a lot of new armaments for the defense ministry and for the Navy and for the Air Force. There was a special program of rearmament of the Russian armed forces. The first one was from 2009 till 2015. Then in 2011 there was another program which is designed for the 2020, and the Russian military got better salaries. So now the military lobby is back in terms of influence on policy making. But on the other hand, over the preceding decade, the civilian structures, they managed to establish some kind of civilian control over the power ministries and over the armed forces. For example, as you might know, the current defense minister, Sergei Shoigu, actually was a civilian. He came from the Ministry of Emergency Situations, but it was not a military structure. I mean, and before that, he was just a civilian guy, a civilian engineer, so he has a non-military background. And he tries to exercise civilian control over the military. We can criticize the previous defense minister, Anatoly Serdyukov, for corruption, for that kind of stuff, but he brought a lot of civilian control to the defense ministry, and part of his political empathy is still there. So we still have a quite sizable apparatus, machinery run by the civilian persons, and they try to control and put check on the professional military in terms of, for example, arms acquisition, auditing, that kind of stuff. So we still have quite a significant civilian component even under Sergei Shoigu.
Right. Well, maybe we should call it an evening then, and thank you once again for coming out. I hope you feel as though you've learned something tonight. And, yeah.
Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of your evening. It's really been nice the way your various talks have complemented one another. Appreciated being able to come. Now, I guess this is the first time I've heard. And yeah, they're kind of building on each other and filling out the gaps. So yeah, this has been great. But you didn't even use your water and you were coughing a bit. So,
Oh, it's okay.
So you're okay?
No, it's fine.
Right. So, do you think we got it all, Artem?
I don't know when it was, what was the end time it was scheduled for?
Oh,
When you requested it, how long did you
I
request it for?
don't know.
So, guess it was recorded the time
For
that you
that
requested.
amount of
Yep.
time. Okay, I'm not sure. Oh, is that
I had
right?
a friend that said, you need to text him because they're talking
Oh.
about you down here. So
Oh.
I figured he might want to make a connection with Michael.
Oh,
Is that-
yeah,
so that they
yeah.
could, so all the students
Right,
could somehow stay in
right.
touch. Anyway, I did text him to.
Oh,
So that's why you showed
oh,
up.
okay.
So I figured that I told him to introduce himself to Michael and that he'll know what it is that
You mean, so he's here now?
Yes.
I
Like
didn't
in
recognize him.
Alaska. Right up there talking to Greg.
Oh, to Troy? Oh, okay. Okay. Well, so Troy will have to.
Resources and stuff.
I pointed out my
Anything like that.
Okay.
to him to make sure he talked to
Federal Reserve funds, several of them. Revenues from gas experts and other experts goes to the reserve fund, stabilization fund. They have several reserve fund, guards fund, stabilization.
Okay.
They
So it's not specifically earmarked for the area.
No, not specifically. Just in case. For example, this